Hello, everybody, and welcome to Narativ. When you log on to Facebook or Twitter, the last thing you're thinking about is if you're interacting with a mobster from the murky underworld of organized crime. Most of the time, you're just catching up with news from your neighborhood or the latest updates from your friends. Chances are you're not in it for the child porn, the illicit drugs, the terrorism, the weapons trafficking, or the Russian propaganda. But that doesn't mean those things aren't there. Since the very first post on Facebook, it's been accused of being exploitative, of fostering a kind of anything-goes bro culture, which has become the standard, frankly, for all social media companies for some reason. This culture is often defended by its founders and its most passionate users as a bastion of free speech. And it's true, you can go on any of these networks and say almost anything you want and be protected. And along with the billions of dollars in revenue and the fabulous lifestyles, these social media playboys have been largely left alone because of this argument, this unregulated market that they've created. And they've also become filthy rich. That's because they've allowed a cesspool of pornography, drug deals, weapon smuggling, money laundering to exist right under the surface of these networks. These platforms have become the main thoroughfare for the underworld, at least that's according to French prosecutors. Mobsters no longer need to meet in dark street corners or in some back alley to do business. They can just log on to the encrypted chats offered by any of these social networks and conduct their transactions from the comfort of their own homes, completely undetected and protected by the social networks. And that is why the arrest of Pavel Durov, the 39-year-old billionaire owner of Telegram, is so significant. And it's what tonight's show is all about, as we uncover the Oligarch web. Dateline, August 28, 2024. Pavel Durov, the enigmatic founder of Telegram, was charged by French authorities for alleged involvement in serious illicit organized crimes, including complicity in the spread of sexual images of children, promotion of terrorism, and a litany of other violations. Durov, once celebrated as a champion of free speech for defying the Kremlin, now finds himself at the center of a storm he had long sought to avoid. The irony is palpable. The man who fled Russia in 2014 to escape government control is now facing prosecution in the heart of free Europe over his platform's alleged failure to protect its most vulnerable users. There is a lot that raises eyebrows when it comes to Durov. He is the sole owner of Telegram. That means he's worth an estimated $9.6 billion. He owns 100% of the operation. Telegram serves 950 million users, let's call it a billion users, but is run by a skeleton crew of him and 29 other staffers. Durov also has an unusual lifestyle, claiming to have fathered 100 babies through sperm donations. And he owns no real estate or typical trappings of wealth, claiming to value freedom above all. His only interview in years has been with Fox News' former anchor, Tucker Carlson.
You don't own
no big assets. Exactly.
an island in Hawaii or no
land, no real estate, nothing.
Why?
Well, because for me, my number one priority in life is my freedom. And once you start buying things, first, it will tie you down to a physical location. In my view, it's my personal view. I don't have nothing against people who are buying real estate, but in my personal view, it would be like this for me. And the second reason is I like to stay focused on what we do at Telegram.
In reality, that carefully manicured image of a free speech advocate was just a facade, under which billions of dollars in illicit trades have been taking place. Terror campaigns have been organized, and the Russian army has been running its entire war effort in Ukraine on Telegram. Despite Durov's claims of being exiled from Russia because the Kremlin demanded access to user content, Telegram has long been suspected of maintaining a backdoor connection to the Kremlin. These suspicions are fueled by the app's popularity among Russian officials and its ability to operate relatively freely in a country known for its strict control over information. Significantly, investigators have revealed that Telegram uses payment systems directly linked to Digital Sky Technologies, a Russian investment firm with deep ties to the Kremlin. This connection contradicts Durov's claims of complete independence, and it raises serious questions about the extent of Russian influence over the platform, despite claiming to have left Russia in 2014 and stating he does not visit the country. Records show that Pavel Durov has entered Russia over 50 times between 2015 and 2021. Specifically, he spent most of 2017 in Russia when authorities were campaigning against Telegram. He was also in Russia on June 18, 2020, when Telegram was officially unblocked there. He continued to visit Russia until October 2021. All of these facts contradict Durov's public statements about not returning to Russia after leaving in 2014. Then there's Telegram's open network project called TON, a blockchain project initiated by Durov. It attracted some of Russia's most prominent investors before it was shut down, including Kiwi co-founder Sergei Solonin, Wimbledon co-founder David Yakubashvili. Other potential investors included billionaires Roman Abramovich, Mikhail Abizov, both very close to Putin and the Kremlin. Moreover, Telegram has been repeatedly linked to organized crime networks. Its encryption and self-destructing messages have made it a favorite tool for drug cartels, human traffickers, and terrorist organizations. Despite Durov's claims of cooperating with authorities to combat illegal activities, critics argue that Telegram's structure and policies make it an ideal platform for criminal enterprises. So what's all this got to do with Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg? Meta's Mark Zuckerberg is often cast as Durov's rival, when he is in fact deeply connected to the same network of Russian money and influence that funded Durov's earlier startup, vKontakt. In fact, vKontakt and Facebook are basic clones of each other. These days, Facebook is called Meta, but in the early days of Facebook, it received crucial funding from DST. In 2009, when Facebook was struggling financially, it received a $200 million investment from DST. The Russian firm acquired a stake that grew to between 5.4% and 10%. DST's largest shareholder and initial funder was Alisher Usmanov, an oligarch closely associated with Vladimir Putin. Facebook and vKontakt were strategic partners, and it's hard to tell the difference between the two sites, or at least it was for a while. Zuckerberg and Durov have a history of collaboration, despite the public rivalry. But if you ask Durov, as Tucker Carlson did, what their relationship is all about, this is what he says.
We met with Mark more than 10 years ago. I was still running VK, and I told Mark and his colleagues about our app platform. We launched an app platform. I think it was 2009, VK. They were very interested. It was an interesting meeting. They ended up trying to copy not what we did, but what I told them we did. That was funny. I remember him asking me whether we were planning to start something on a global basis, on the global level, like go for international expansion. I said no, and I asked him whether he was going to try to capture more of my domestic market where I was working on. And he said no, and we both ended up doing exactly that in like 2 or 3 weeks.
So I'm thinking I shouldn't go into business with Mark Zuckerberg.
Look, no comment.
Rivals? Hardly. In 2016, Facebook's role in spreading misinformation and shaping public opinion in the US elections became very significant. You'll remember the controversy when Facebook data was used alongside Russian-made propaganda to help elect Donald Trump president. Despite the findings and the fines, none of it has changed Mark Zuckerberg's political thinking. Here's what he said recently about Donald Trump.
The main thing that I hear from people is that they actually want to see less political content on our services because they come to our services to connect with people. So, that's what we're going to do. Where we give people control over this, but we're generally trying to recommend less political content. So I think you're going to see our services play less of a role in this election than they have in the past. And personally, I'm also planning on not playing a significant role in the election. And I've done some stuff personally in the past. I'm not planning on doing that this time. And that includes, not endorsing either of the candidates. Now, look, there's obviously a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. The historic events over the weekend. And on a personal note, it's, seeing Donald Trump get up after getting shot in the face and pump his fist in the air with the American flag is one of the most badass things I've ever seen in my life. But, and I think, look, at some level as an American, it's like hard to not get kind of emotional about that spirit and that fight. And I think that's why a lot of people like the guy. But look, we're living in a pretty crazy time. And I view our role here is to make it so that everyone can express their views on this stuff.
Zuckerberg's stance on political content and fact-checking has been a subject of ongoing debate, with critics arguing that Facebook policies have allowed for the proliferation of extremist content and foreign influence campaigns. But, just like Telegram, Facebook has been implicated in several scandals involving organized crime. The platform has been used for human trafficking, drug trade, and money laundering operations. Despite efforts to combat these activities, the sheer scale of Facebook's user base makes it an attractive tool for criminal networks. Let's just say that Pavel Durov and Mark Zuckerberg are frenemies, but really friends. So let's turn to social media's other big juggernaut, Elon Musk. Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, now rebranded as X, adds another layer of complexity to this web of influence. When news broke of Durov's arrest, Musk took to X to express solidarity, tweeting, "Liberté, liberté, liberté?" If you close your eyes and you listen to Durov speak about free speech, it sounds exactly like Musk. And that may be a lot more by design than we realize.
With Jack, he told me that if I told him, look, you can run this company with 20 people. You don't need so many people. And the response was, I agree with you, but if we start firing so many people, it will make the Wall Street scared. They will think something's very wrong with the company. And we don't want to do that. And that's why we got to keep all these employees around.
So to keep the stock price high, he had to run it inefficiently. That's what you're saying.
If I understood him correctly, that's but to his credit, Elon has to take Twitter private before he could.
Just recently, we found out that Kremlin money has been secretly behind Musk's purchase of Twitter, now known as X. A US-based venture capital firm called 8VC, run by Peter Thiel protege Joe Lonsdale, was identified as one of the 100 largest investors in Musk's Twitter deal. What makes this significant is that 8VC employs individuals closely connected to two prominent Russian oligarchs, Peter Avin, the president of Alpha Group, a major Russian financial conglomerate, and Vadim Moshkovich, a founder of Rusagro, one of the largest Russian agricultural businesses. Both Avin and Moshkovich have been subject to Western sanctions due to their ties to the Russian government. Their sons, Jack Moshkovich and Dennis Avin, work for 8VC despite their father's connections to the Russian elite and making them part owners of X. Other notable investors, people like Bill Ackman, the activist investor holding a stake through Pershing Square Foundation. Sean Diddy Combs invested through Sean Combs Capital. Binance, the cryptocurrency exchange based in Hong Kong, committed $500 million to the deal. And Saudi Arabia's Prince Al-Walid bin Talal Al Saud converted his Twitter stake into X shares, as did Jack Dorsey, the former Twitter co-founder. He rolled over his investment into Musk's new private enterprise. But there's no doubt that Musk's approach to content moderation is very different from Jack Dorsey's. And these new policies have raised concerns about the spread of misinformation and potential foreign influence, leading to criticisms that their platforms have become breeding grounds for extremism and misinformation. Like Telegram and Facebook, X has also been implicated in facilitating organized crime. The platform's role in cryptocurrency scams, market manipulation schemes, and the spread of extremist ideologies has been very well documented. Musk's takeover and subsequent policy changes have, according to some, made issues far worse at X than they ever were at Twitter. When it comes to Pavel Durov and Elon Musk, they are kindred spirits. Nancy Pelosi once said to Donald Trump while he was president, "With you, all the roads lead to Putin." Now it seems more than coincidental that both Musk and Zuckerberg are supporters of Donald Trump. Musk has even agreed to bankroll Trump to the tune of $45 million a month during this year's elections. And he makes no secret of his affiliations. But the real value of X and Facebook, like Telegram, is the possibility of crypto being used to fund all these illicit trades that go on inside these platforms, including organized criminal activity that Durov has now been accused of. Russia itself has been dubbed a mafia state masquerading as a nuclear superpower. So it's no surprise then that these social networks were funded in part by Kremlin cash, often money it's amassed through illegal means around the world. It's also increasingly useful for these platforms to have the large political sway they have, because that gives these organized crime syndicates the kind of power most organized criminals only dream of. By publicly endorsing and supporting the likes of Donald Trump, they are also electing politicians who will turn a blind eye to their criminal underbelly. Tonight, we've just scratched the surface on all the financial ties between these social networks and each other and the Kremlin. These financial ties raise serious concerns about the potential for these platforms to be used as tools of foreign influence, particularly in the context of elections and geopolitical conflicts. As we approach the 2024 elections, the intricate web of connections between Russian oligarchs, tech moguls, and global social media platforms raises serious concerns about the integrity of our digital public square. The involvement of organized crime adds another layer of complexity and danger to an already troubling situation. As this chapter of tech history unfolds, one question looms large. Can these global platforms ever truly prioritize user safety and democratic values over profits and geopolitical interests? The story of social media's compromised state is far from over, and its resolution will likely shape the future of online discourse and democratic engagement for years to come. This is Shalev for Narativ, reminding you that in the world of social media and global politics, the connections often run deeper and darker than they appear on the surface. Be careful out there. Joining us today is William Echikson, a non-resident senior fellow with the Digital Innovation Initiative and editor of the online tech policy journal Bandwidth at the Center of European Policy Analysis. With a wealth of experience in tech and journalism, including 6.5 years at Google and a distinguished career as a foreign correspondent, Mr. Echikson brings unique insights to our discussion. He's an American and a Belgian citizen based in Brussels. He holds a magna cum laude from Yale and has authored 4 books on topics ranging from the collapse of communism in Central Europe to the history of Bordeaux wines. That's an interesting one. I share your fascination with wines. It's interesting that this all happens in France today. As we pick it up, it's all involving this high-profile arrest of the Telegram CEO, and now he's been charged. Pavel Durov has long been a champion of free speech, yet now, according to these charges at least, he's also been a conduit for a lot of organized criminal activity ranging from child sexual exploitation to money laundering. Firstly, what's the reaction in Europe today to this arrest?
I think it's seen as something very important, a real marker. And I think in the long term, you're seeing a real shift from, as you were saying, little regulation on the internet. When I was at Google, there wasn't much regulation. Over the last couple of years, especially here in Brussels, we're on the front lines of tech regulation. In a democracy, there are a series of new laws that seek to address some of the excesses of the internet, be it counterfeit products being sold on marketplaces or illegal speech, according to the European definition.
It's interesting that he does style himself as this free speech advocate, but in reality, some people suspect that he still has backdoor ties to the Kremlin and that he operates as a proxy for them. Do you have any sense of which of those two versions of his life are true?
He is quite mysterious. My dealings with Telegram have always been mysterious. They would go into countries where I thought they would get banned and that somehow they weren't banned. It was always very hard to figure out where they were. And that's one of the reasons I think he's gotten himself in so much trouble. All the other social media platforms have representatives here in Brussels, participate in memorandums of understanding, code of conducts, and now the new Digital Services Act. Durov and Telegram have always been absent. And he probably lied about the number of users he has. So he's really dug himself a hole.
He claims to have 950 million users. Is that too low or too high?
I think he has 950 million users around the globe, but he says he has less than 45 million here in the European Union, and therefore isn't subject to the new law to combat illegal speech. He isn't a very large online platform. That sounds terribly accurate to me, but I don't know. The real thing is that I've never met anyone from Telegram here, and I know that when I talk to the European Commission officials, they have trouble getting in contact with the people from Telegram.
He's got a staff of 30 people, and he is both the CEO, the product manager, the chief marketing guy. He does almost everything there.
We have a very small staff. I know WhatsApp had almost no one, and then it was sold for almost 20 billion. You don't need a lot of people to run a messaging service, but you need to start hiring people to respond to the police, to moderate some of the conversations. One of the things that was going on Telegram that I was surprised about was that he was letting public channels go up to 200,000 members, and it was all encrypted. I'm pretty sure there was a lot of bad stuff going on his platform.
It does seem to be a hotbed of illicit activity, whether it's terrorist operations communicating via Telegram, or even the Russian army. I read a post today that said that the Russian army operates its activities in Ukraine using Telegram. It's a very successful encrypted service. These channels can have multiple followers and are pretty secure in getting one message to a lot of people at one time.
No, it's true. On both sides of the Russian-Ukrainian war, they've used Telegram, and Telegram has become an essential, is indispensable as the internet and the new communications tools symbolized by Telegram. And at the same time, it's been left to be the Wild West. And that's changing now. That's the big story, I think, is what you're seeing is governments around the globe won't allow the Wild West. They want to corral these messaging services that have become very powerful and subject them to regulations. The question is, what type of regulations?
And it's interesting you mentioned Starlink there, because you raised Starlink, and I'll raise Musk to that because he's, of course, the owner of that, has been operating, it seems, again, on behalf of Russian interests, perhaps, in some aspects of the war in Ukraine. Elon Musk and Pavel Durov are ideologically twinned. They seem to have the same attitudes towards a lot of things. They both style themselves as these free speech absolutists and allow for an enormous amount of unchecked and unmoderated activity on their websites, especially in Musk's case.
There is somewhat of a difference. I used to work a lot with Twitter when governments would take down YouTube when I was at Google. And I found Twitter was the most responsible of the platforms. They really pushed back against government overreach. They were serious about cleaning up the toxic cesspool that these platforms can become. But Musk has come in, fired all those people, and embarked on a path of confrontation with Europe and other democratic governments, not to mention Brazil, where he's pulling out and so forth. At the same time, there still is someone here in Brussels from Twitter. I met her recently, and the authorities know where to find Twitter. With Telegram, they didn't know where to find him unless they could track him on his phone and get him when he was landing in Paris. He wasn't showing up or sending representatives to meet with government authorities.
So you think that's at the core of this, is just his inability to cooperate on a regulatory level?
I think that's what turned this into something quite extreme. But I also think the pendulum is swinging, and we're moving away from unbridled free speech towards more regulated, moderated, responsible requests from governments that these platforms be responsible in a way they weren't before. When I was at Google, I wake up every day and say, which government has banned one of Google's services? And it was inevitably Turkey taking down YouTube, someone taking down Maps because they didn't like the way Maps was detailed, and so on, and up to 60 countries. And often these governments didn't just take down services, they made them not work well. They would put in throttles to the internet connectivity that made it seem like it just wasn't a good service. It wasn't effective. Then they could avoid being on some sort of blacklist or suppressing internet freedom. But since I've left Google, it's become much more strict. The authoritarians, the Great Firewall already existed, and it's been reinforced in China, Russia. And there was relatively free access to YouTube until a couple months ago. Was still up and running, now is no longer in Russia. Right. But I think the real question is, in democracies, how much responsibility are we willing to give to platforms for what is hosted? Until now, they basically haven't been liable for anything or very little. They were only liable if the police came to you and said, this is illegal, you need to take it down, we would take it down. Okay. Otherwise, we would be guilty under Section 230 in the US or something called the e-commerce. Now that's changed, and there's a sense that the platforms need to take more responsibility in moderating their content. There's still, I think in democracies, the new laws here in Europe don't require proactive monitoring to block it, but they do require that you take actions to show that you're eliminating illegal speech once it goes up online, and certainly that you're responding to government requests. You can push back against the government. Google, we pushed back a lot against the government request. And we published a transparency report under this new Digital Services Act. There are responsibilities, and Elon Musk is wading into deep territory. He may face, as far as I know, it's not criminal charges. That's different. But Twitter could get 6% of a fine of 6% of its global income.
In Europe, or it's global income? Global income. Wow.
Because if it breaks, it's under investigation if it breaks this new law that went into effect in Europe.
The thing that strikes me is citizens of democracies have the guarantee of free speech, or at least many of them do. The people who don't have guarantees of free speech are your foreign adversaries. These social networks tend to cross that divide by being funded a lot of the time by either people with ties directly to Russia or other adversaries around the world, or indirect ties that might be through Joe Lonsdale, recently discovered to be one of X's big funders, has ties to Peter Thiel, has ties to the Kremlin through two oligarchs, his sons that work for him. There seems to be that murky between the funders is, I think, the way that Russia is able to subvert democracy by using these social networks as a means of foreign influence.
Some of what you said sounds more like a conspiracy theory than what I would accept as facts. Elon Musk doesn't need Russian investors to keep on doing what he wants to do at X. But it is true that Russian disinformation, Russian manipulation of social platforms, it's been in the news, since 2016 elections in the US. I'm working with a German author who says Russian disinformation targeted Germany with specific memes and propaganda. I think that's all true. I'm not an expert, but I think in the end, I'm more to the American point of view that it's better to have bad speech drowned out by free speech. I think what's different, and many Americans don't understand, is that in Europe, there's a different attitude towards speech. There's some speech that's illegal, and you can't go around denying that the Holocaust took place, for example, because that's illegal in Germany. There's divisions within Europe. Many things that would be acceptable in Finland and Sweden and the Nordics, more free culture and transparent, are unacceptable invasions of privacy or libelous in Spain, Italy, and France. We don't know the details of the charges against Durov, but we do know that when France have been sued for libel, you get sued for libel for pretty much anything. The fines are very low, but here I think the charges are criminal, that he has actually allowed criminal activity, pedophilia, child exploitation, and terrorism on his platform.
Very serious charges against him. Illicit criminal activity, organized criminal activity, including child sexual exploitation, money laundering, gun running, terrorism, you name it. These are very serious crimes. You would not, I bet this guy never expected he'd ever find himself in a court or in jail facing these kinds of charges.
Russia, so he left Russia because it could have happened with Russia. And to be fair to the French, he's held under French law, he's released on bail now, he's not held in Siberia. So I do think what's really shocking about, or startling about this, is that this is happening in a democracy with the protection of the rule of law and free expression. No one's going to tell me that France is the same as China or Russia when it comes to throttling free expression. I was just reading about the Hong Kong court convicting 2 journalists of just writing decent articles.
Doing their job. It happens all the time.
That's not happening.
So let me ask you this question just as a closing here. If Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, if these investigations around Durov turn out to be fruitful for the French, and they find very similar kind of activities happening to Musk under Musk's X and under Facebook of Zuckerberg, are these 2 potentially going to change their image around the world from being these sort of high-flying billionaire playboys to being potentially wanted by some governments around the world for these criminal activities?
I tend to think there's still a big difference between Meta and Twitter and Telegram. Meta has a big team. They have an ex-deputy prime minister from English Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg that talks to the regulators. I think there's no comparison in the type of responsibility that they take. I have some issues sometimes with Meta. In fact, they often would go to governments and say, oh, just tell us what to do. And that I thought was equally bad as not being able to stand up to governments. But I don't think it's fair to compare them with Telegram. Elon Musk, he surprises me every day.
It certainly seems like the unregulated playground of social media is not going to be the same going forward after this.
That's for sure. The idea that anything goes and you can have, as we were talking about, the Wild West. No, regulation is coming. It's already in place in Europe. And the real challenge is to enforce and make it effective. That's a real challenge because speech issues aren't easy. There's a thin line between illegal and legal speech. And the studies I've done on laws that have tried to limit illegal speech have proved ineffective. So you have, for example, a German law called NextG, which put big fines on social media. And yet the German government never brought any cases under it. It didn't change behavior. It didn't scare people from using the internet or change what Google or Meta are doing.
It seems to me like there's no way really to enforce any sort of responsibility on the owners of these social platforms. But then there's also this issue of encrypting content. Yes, you want to protect free speech and everyone certainly wants to be able to say what they want to say. But when that same encryption is used to foment terrorism or any other kinds of unrest, it becomes very problematic. The issue of encryption is also a thing that has to be dealt with by regulators.
That's a tougher one because I think that encryption is fundamental. We have strong privacy rules and the ability to not have the government find everything you're saying is important. I'm more skeptical about forcing platforms to break encryption. I know there was the case with Apple, but there's always with child safety. I think personal conversations between individuals should be allowed to remain private and encrypted. It's different when you have 200,000 people on a channel and it's all happening without any transparency. But the bottom line is regulations coming, going to force these platforms to become more responsible. The platforms know it's coming, but actually solving or reducing the toxicity on as platforms is very difficult. In my writing, I think the most effective potential solution is what I see at Wikipedia or Reddit, where you have unpaid volunteer editors who step in and say, crossing the line. Reddit, from what I understood, just got rid of a lot of groups that were dealing in very problematic subjects. They found it was good business, right? Reddit's gone on an IPO. And the bottom line is you don't want to be on a platform with, maybe people do, but I don't think advertisers do. So I think that Telegram, as it was going for an IPO, would have had to clean up its act anyhow.
It's even there. William Echikson is a non-resident senior fellow with the Digital Innovation Initiative, the edited online tech policy journal Bandwidth at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Thank you very much for being with me today, William. I appreciate your time and your insights. It's been very helpful having you online.
Thanks. Appreciate it. It was fun.
See you next time. Thank you very much.
Take care. Call anytime. No problem. It works well.
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narativ, where truth lives.